Welcome to our daily reflection for this Thursday, September 5th. And today is a lesson about wisdom and humility and trusting and surrendering to God. And so what happens is we have Peter, who's a great fisherman, and Jesus gets in his boat after a teaching and tells him to cast off. And of course, Peter had fished at night. And when you fish with nets, it's much better to fish at night in the darkness, because at night the fish tend to cluster up more. They scatter when they're feeding during the day as the day warms up, and it's easier to see the nets and things like that. And so Peter, who's a professional fisherman, sees this Jewish rabbi who tells him, "Hey, let's go out fishing as morning now is well begun, and the sun is up." And Peter, who just washed all of his nets and cleaned them and folded them up, now has to undo all the work he did after a hard night of fishing, which wasn't very successful, by the way. And yet, he listens to Jesus and he goes out, and Jesus says, "Let's cast into the deep." And again, that's not something you necessarily, if the fish are feeding, they might start being in the shallows and other things, but Peter obeys. He casts his nets into the deep, and they haul in a great haul of fish. And this fits beautifully what Paul says. If anyone thinks he's wise, let him consider himself a fool, and so become wise. Peter thought he knew the ways of fishing, and what he did was the wise way of fishing at night, not during the day. A fool fishes in the day, right? And yet Jesus told him to do something foolish, and he gets a great haul of fish. And then Peter then realizes there's something more to Jesus than just a simple rabbi, a great preacher. He knows there's something deep there. And so he says, "Lord, depart from me, for I'm a sinful man." In other words, Peter says, "I'm not worthy. There's something holy about you, Jesus, and I'm not holy." And then Jesus tells him not to be afraid. And I think that's such a great response and invitation from our Lord, because as we encounter the holiness of God, we've been realized, wait a minute, I'm not holy. And God knows that. And he tells us not to be afraid, not to be afraid. And then Jesus gives Peter a promise. "I'm going to make you a fisher of men," right? "I'm going to make you a fisher of men. And you're going to need to have the same kind of foolishness if you're going to be successful, of listening to my word if you're going to be a fisher of men." And that's really the invitation we have here, is if we're going to be faithful to Christ, we have to be willing to be foolish in the eyes of the world, because that's how we're going to be successful. Obedience to God, because God makes our success happen. Just as Jesus made Peter's nets full and his foolish method of fishing successful, he will make the church successful if we're fools for Christ. If we boast in the Lord and in the cross, as we saw last Sunday, if that's our boast, not in ourselves, not in our eloquence and our ability to articulate the truth, but simply to proclaim and witness the truth and to witness the love of God, then we can be wise if we're willing to be foolish in the eyes of the world. That's the great paradox. And I think so often we're afraid to be considered a fool by our children, by our neighbors, by simply proclaiming that God is God and that Jesus can make all things happen and that in him is our hope. And we're afraid of simply declaring the love of God in the cross. And that fear of being foolish keeps us from being truly wise and successful. So let's follow Peter's example. Let's do the foolish thing for the sake of God and let God bless it or not. May the Lord bless and keep you.
This daily reflection is brought to you thanks to the generous support of the Mission Circle. Join the Mission Circle to help Catholics worldwide understand, live, and share their faith. Sign up at missioncircle.org today.